Hello, welcome back to our discussion of JavaScript. Today we're going to discuss the JavaScript class that was introduced with the standard ES 2015, so within the last 5 years. JavaScript has undergone a revolution actually in the last 5 years in terms of additional features. And why has that happened? Because more and more complexity is being pushed into JavaScript, from client-side development to also server-side development now with Node.js. More and more work is being done in JavaScript, more and more lines of code. So growing up from the relatively small amounts of code to manage UI events have become now growing more and more into industrial strength applications akin to server-side applications. So let's get right at it and look at the JavaScript class. So I have my code up here. I commented out the function constructor, which was older from earlier versions of JavaScript. But to recall what it did, a function, capital N, by convention only, and then the list of parameters, and then hook this up in with those parameters to create the initial object. And then later on, you could add object methods and other properties. But the initial constructor was a function constructor. Now, it had some weaknesses. For example, if you didn't use it with a new keyword, the error wouldn't be immediately apparent. It would instead do the wrong thing and not create a proper object. So the new keyword had to be used with a function constructor. And that new keyword did many things that we're used to in other languages. It created an empty object. It set this to the empty object. Add the implicit return to this statement so that it returns with it, and we do not explicitly return the value in a function constructor. And then it adds the underscore proto for prototypical inheritance. Now the class added in ES 2015 adds a lot to this. It builds, though, on the idea of the function constructor. It's not something different, and it's still JavaScript. It's not Java or C#, as we'll see. So we have the class NenUser here. Notice before we had that as a function constructor. Now we have an explicit class with a method with using the keyword constructor. Now you can only have one constructor in JavaScript. So there's no method overloading in JavaScript. So there's no constructor overloading. There's one constructor. And here are its parameters. And then we set up and set the objects, this properties to those properties, setting up our object. Notice there's no explicit return. So the core of this, the actual block of code that is within this constructor, is very much like the function constructor. One thing that this adds, though, is built-in protection. So when you use the class NenUser, you have to use it with the new keyword, or you'll get immediately an error message rather than, let's say, just not working properly, as in the function constructor. So the new keyword still uses with the name of the class and implicitly calls the constructor. New is still doing all the things that it has done in the past, but now it's required in conjunction with the class name in order to create an object. So the class also adds the ability to add very convenient instance methods, just as in other languages. So notice there's no use of the keyword function here. It's implied. So we have instance methods here. The instance method fight that uses style and strength. Notice we also use string interpolation here. String interpolation is the use of the backtick rather than a normal quote for a string that announces the to look for variables that are embedded within that string. And this specific syntax, $, curly brace, and then you stick your variable inside of that, and that's string interpolation. So the compiler will then, or the code will then, insert the values of the variables inside that string and give you a conveniently formatted string. The other thing that's nice about the class is that now we have explicit static methods. So static methods, as in other languages, are methods that are associated with the class rather than the object. That is, there's no object data inside this. It's just scoped within the class. Is NenUser. In this case, we take an object as a parameter, and check against its constructor to be NenUser, and then we say, then this returns whether it is or it is not an instance of that class. So here's a couple of use of this constructor here to create an array and to illustrate. Following this pattern, we can create consistent objects now. And then we also have this individual object, and we print these various things out here. And then user.fight here, use enhancer with 10, and then again pulling specific instance data and using it here in this method. And then the static method is then user. We pass it an instance of that object, and it says true. And then we pass it a string, and it says false. So this is our introduction of the keyword class, which adds a lot of power to JavaScript without changing its essential nature.